Members, as we've already formed a quorum, I now call the meeting to order. Item 1 on the agenda, information papers issued since the last meeting. Just one. The detail has already been set out on the agenda, so I won't dwell on that. Item 2 on the agenda, items for discussion at the next meeting. The next regular meeting will be held on the 12th of January, Monday at 4:30 p.m. Last week I had a meeting with the administration which proposed 2 items for discussion. The first one is the work progress report of the Development Committee for Teachers and School Principals. This is to discuss the salient points in the professional development process at different stages of professional development for teachers and school principals, as well as the proposed enhancement. And there will be another item related to the UGC. We can propose 2 more items. Last time we collected views from colleagues on the proposed items for discussion. They are now set out in the list of outstanding items for discussion. So would you please refer to that? After this meeting, I'll discuss with the Deputy Chairman what to be discussed at the next meeting. Why are we not discussing that now? It's because in next month we'll have the policy address. So we'll work out later which 2 other items we can have for our next regular meeting. And then there will be a special meeting. At our meeting on the 10th of November, some members proposed a special meeting to be convened to listen to different sectors of the community on self-financed tertiary education, its regulation, governance, and quality assurance, and to receive views on the consultancy report published in August. We got a paper 195 from the Secretariat to consult members. I've decided to call a special meeting on the 7th of February 2015 at 9 a.m. So we'll see how many deputations will be attending before we allocate the time slots. Yes? There's a major concern. Some university lecturers and assistant and associate professors instigated in public students to engage in contempt of court. I understand that the universities would like to have a mechanism to handle that, and they're now studying the matter. Should the LegCo also discuss this? All right, the clerk, would you please note this down first? Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, I would like to target Dr. Chung Lai-wan. You don't need to target her. Well, we would first of all have to consider what instigation means. Well, the barristers here, would you please educate her on what instigation means? All right, point taken. Well, under ROP 83A, if members of any direct or indirect pecuniary interest related to any discussion item today, they should make a disclosure before discussion. First of all, funding support for research work conducted by the post-secondary education sector. We'll invite the representatives of the Education Bureau to come in. Those who would like to speak, please raise their hands. Well, you can speak, but you don't need to instigate the others. Mrs. Regina Ip, Deputy Chairman.
局長請坐。
Secretary for Education, please be seated.
就今日討
The Education Bureau has submitted papers for this item. We've also received a paper from the Central Policy Unit and information on Public Policy Research Funding Scheme, and the Electoral Secretariat has also provided us with a background brief. Secretary, would you please give a brief introduction? Thank you, Chairman. Teaching and research are considered two core duties in the post-secondary sector. Research will promote the flourishment and development of industries and enhance in the long term our competitiveness and our economy. So teaching is closely linked to research. Teaching is based on research. Scholars should be at the forefront of knowledge in their field through research so that they can transmit the latest thinking and developments and engender a sense of inquisitiveness. There's a strong need for Hong Kong to nurture and develop its own academics, and this requires a strong research element across all major disciplines. The government attaches great importance to supporting the research work conducted by the post-secondary sector. In 2012-13, the reported aggregate expenditure on research of the University Grants Committee funded institutions amounted to $7.576 million, representing 0.36% of overseas jurisdictions. When compared with last year, with an enhancement of 6%, and government funding amounts to the major portion. From 2005 onwards, government commitment is ever increasing. In 2012-13, about 82% of the total research expenditure came from the government, totaling $6.192 billion, representing a 5% growth over the previous year. A quarter, that is around $4 billion, had been spent on research. In 2009, we got a research grant set up to ensure that there are funds for research. That's the largest ever. This shows the government's resolute support for research. In 2012-13, $1.5 billion more were injected into the system. And we also support competitive funding schemes for application from the tertiary sector, including collaborative research schemes, individual research schemes, as well as collaborative research schemes with other jurisdictions. Starting from 2012-13, for the new schemes for the self-financed local sector, we started another scheme to enhance academic and research development. And then, apart from the UGC and the Research Council, we got another fund with 100 local university schemes involving over $2 billion per year. All these schemes are to provide to the higher education sector stable support. In future, we'll rely on the higher education sector to carry out research so that teaching and research can develop at the same time concurrently so as to enhance our long-term competitiveness. We would like to have more views from members such that we can scale new heights. Here, I'd also like to invite Mr. Stanley Wong, Research Director of the Central Policy Unit, to do a briefing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to update you on the latest progress of the Public Policy Research Funding Scheme. As mentioned in the paper, up to November this year, we received 116 applications. 33 had been granted, involving around $15 million. And then 50 were declined. In other words, another 33 applications are still being processed. When we looked back at these 100-odd applications, they cover a wide spectrum of policy areas, including land and housing, aging and retirement, and so forth. The details can be found in paragraph 9 of the paper. When we look back at this period, the success rate was around 35%. That's more or less similar to that under the RGC. Due to time constraint, I would not introduce the details of the paper. If members would like me to elaborate, I'll be happy to take questions in a moment. I saw hands from these members: Mr. Charles Mock, Dennis Kwok, Ip Kin Yun, Regina Ip, Gary Fan, Fernando Chang, Kenneth Chan. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Dr. Chung Lai Wan. All right. Questions and answers, 3 minutes each. First, Mr. Charles Mock. Mr. Chairman, the last 2 points of the Bureau's paper is that the Innovation Technology Fund and the RGC should have more collaboration. In fact, the vetting criteria are different. Some academics told me that the biggest problem facing them now is that many lecturers and professors don't want to do research because they attach more importance to teaching. Now you say that you would like to apply the research results and encourage the teaching staff to head towards that direction. But these schemes are not enough in terms of quality and quantity. So what can the government do to support the development of industries and the application of research results? And then 3 years and $24 million will not be enough. Secretary for Education, I would defer to Mr. Stanley Wong.
Which one would you like to answer? The two? I'd like to talk about the link between the ITF and RGC. Now, when we engaged in large-scale research, now there is a time for the PI to come and apply for funds. And in the end, whether there is tech transfer, it depends on whether they applied. So that link is not very satisfactory. So starting from last year, the year before last, we discussed with the ITF. So when one engages in large projects, team-based research, the TRF and AOL schemes, later at the interview stage, we will ask the representative to come and look at the PI of the proposal, and we ask that the PI, when they submit the proposal, there should be a paragraph on whether there is the capability for tech transfer, so that the PI can think well in advance in what way the research can offer tech transfer. So we see success there. So the applications submitted now do have this linking opportunity. Dennis Kwok. Now looking at Annex B of the document, there are 33 research items. Are these all open items, the Secretary, Professor? Is that for the Central Policy Unit? I believe the question is about the subsidy scheme for central policy, public policies. Now, there are a series of 33 items. Many of them are public policies of interest to the Hong Kong public. So are all these results open to the public? Mr. Wong? I am glad to confirm that all these reports, once they are completed, after they have been vetted by us, will be put on the internet and made available to the public. So when you say vetting, do you mean that some items were vetted and subsequently not put on the internet? Now, we have an assessment panel, information of which was supplied in the document. So all the study reports have been assessed by the assessment panel before funding is granted. So after the report is submitted, we submit them to the panel to see whether the initial goal was achieved. Now, if this is affirmed by the panel, we accept the report and then it will go on the internet. So after the panel accepted it, it will be published. Yes. Now, if for certain reasons the panel does not accept the report, will the report not be publicized? This is a problem that we haven't encountered because it's still early days. There are not yet any items for which reports have been submitted, so I can study this matter with the assessment panel to see how they would deal with such a case. So in the past, there hasn't been a case where the panel doesn't agree with the findings and do not publish the report. My understanding is that all reports have been published, not one has been declined. Once it has gone through the assessment panel, it will be published. Chairman, let me clarify. Now, this scheme started only since 16th of July 2013, so no report has been submitted. Next, Yip Keen Yuen. Now, as you remember, on the industrial policy research subsidy scheme, this was hotly discussed a couple of years ago in this panel, and at the time there was a saying by the government that in a decision for funding, officials would be invited to participate, and it's possible that the policy setting officials may take part in the assessment. Now, this is in the document submitted in 2013. Now, is that indeed the current practice, and in the future, will you do that? Secretary, Mr. Wong, Stanley Wong. Thank you, Chairman. Now, after the scheme has been implemented, now, after we discussed with the assessment panel, we established that this would be the approach, and I would like to take this opportunity to explain. Now, in the assessment process, basically, we have reference to the approach adopted by the RGC. In other words, every application has to be assessed by 2 members of the assessment panel and 2 other assessors outside the panel. And we also seek the views of the policy bureau involved. And after discussion by the panel, now the scheme has been only implemented for about 1 year. It's still early. So we think that the policy grading should not be included. So there are 5 grades, 2 votes by the assessment panel members, 2 votes by the non-panel members. So now we do not include the vote by the policy bureau. That assessment grade will only be for reference only. Now the 2 non-panel assessors, are they academics or scholars? Yes. The applicant can propose these assessors. Now we can approach these assessors to see if they are willing to help in the assessment. If not, we will seek the view of the assessment panel for them to propose appropriate non-panel assessors. Next, Mrs. Regina Yip, Chairman. Now I've looked at the document and I found that the scientific subsidy research schemes are very scattered. So I think that's for historical reasons. Now, some are theme-based, some are partnership schemes. Now, of course, it's said that R&D is important for commercialization. The examples are broad: Silicon Valley, Berkeley, MIT. Now, why can't Hong Kong achieve what they did? Is it that our research is too scattered? And there are also this key research institutes. Now, in other countries, there are basic research, not applied, but in Hong Kong U, we have excellent professors who are fellows of major foreign universities. It's said that they stand a chance of winning prizes like the similar in quality to the chemistry prize, Nobel Prize. So we have such excellent people. So can we have an advanced chemical research institute? It can be placed at whichever institution. You can gather together the top scholars from HKUST or HKU, and then we can cooperate with institutions on the mainland so as to raise the level of our chemical research. Now, the member said that the research is too scattered. It's not that because we have too many research schemes, it's that there are some research schemes that are large-scale, some are minor. All the projects serve different purposes, and because the results all are in different areas, so at the RGC, we have a planning process to sort through all the schemes to see whether we can group some of them together and reduce the number of others. How about on chemistry? Now, on chemistry, actually at the RGC and the UGC, now last year we already had a discussion. We hope that some of the UGC money can be put up. Right now, the money is already divided among the institutions. So we try to identify the areas where we do well in Hong Kong and to invest the money in that focused manner. Mr. Gary Fan. Now, the CPU is providing us with a document. It has a public policy research subsidy scheme for the people to apply to. And two think tanks have only been approved. One is the one headed by the head of Hang Lung Policy Group. And the other is one headed by Mr. Ho Chung Tai and Priscilla Leung. Now, these think tanks already have a lot of funds at their disposal. Now, if the government wants to promote such research, now they, in fact, maybe do not have to provide funds to these institutes, because you have to check whether they have their own funds, so that we don't have the business sector taking the lead and taking all the initiative. Mr. Wong, now on the successful applicants for this scheme, you can see on our internet. Now, basically, that includes the 8 institutions under the UGC, and there are other degree conferring institutions. And thirdly, there are local non-profit making think tanks, as mentioned. Now, our stipulations are that they have to be non-profit making. We do not consider other factors. Now, in the future, will you consider, because many groups do want to apply. Now, if those groups, if they have greater financial needs than these think tanks, will you consider them? As long as they are think tanks, will you provide public funds for the policy research? We thank the members for his views. We will consider that in due course. Next, Dr. Fernando Cheung. Now, this public policy research subsidy scheme, I remember that the controversy last year was that originally it was supposed to be under the RGC, and then the CPU says it wants to take it, and Mr. Tong Chi Hua said that the money would be moved accordingly, and then there was an assessment panel. There are these 33 research items. A lot of them are of concern to the local public, but I would like to ask now, well, when this is moved back to the CPU, and how does that compare with the previous situation when it was under the RGC? Now, when you took it back under the CPU, there must be a certain reason. Maybe you're saying that the research topics do not meet Hong Kong's needs.
以往嗰個情況。
So can you compare the situation in the past and the situation at present? Any differences? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Cheung. As the Honourable Member observed, for the 33 research projects granted, as set out in Annex B, many of them were related to policy issues that are very urgent, like retirement, population aging, and so forth. I recall that last time when I discussed this issue with members, I pointed out that in the past, when the RGC managed the scheme from 2005 to 2012, altogether 7 to 8 years, 150 projects were granted. involving issues of concern to Hong Kong people, housing, governance, population, media. For all these, only one scheme or one project was granted. So this clearly indicates that under the CPU, this scheme is different from what happened in the past. In that case, I'd like to ask the CPU a question. That is, the scheme is now more down to the earth than in the past. We would like such higher education research to be applied to Hong Kong. So anything for the RGC to learn? Mr. Wong? Well, I dare not say so. For academic research and public policy research, we would like the two to be complementary to each other. For public policy research, we would like to be evidence-based. In our universities, with many scholars that are competent to take up such research projects. But in the past, in terms of management and funding allocation, for example, in the past, there was one allocation per annum, but now we have 4 per year. And efficiency has been enhanced. So in future, we hope that not only the CPU will be involved, because our resources and time are limited. We hope that all academics in Hong Kong, not just confining to those in the universities, even non-UGC higher education institutions can be involved. Next, Mr. Kenneth Chan. Would you please switch on your microphone? Chairman, just now a member pointed out that many research projects gave us the impression that there had not been sufficient coordination. And that reflects history, because among so many institutions and disciplines, we have pluralism. And we went through different stages. And colleagues have different needs in their research work. So we've got a wide spectrum of funding allocation. Some encourage collaboration, some encourage competitiveness, some are more dedicated, some are more theoretical, some are more innovative. Anyway, I'd like to point out 2 points. For research grant available to the higher education sector and think tanks, we don't have enough schemes. Particularly nowadays in universities, each colleague knows that research has to be combined with teaching. But if you don't do research, it is impossible for you to have your tenure renewed. 3 years, 6 years, 7 years, then you'll be kicked out. So if support is not enough, then even if our colleagues have a grand vision, even if individual institutions would like to have their own research projects, they have to compress their commitment or vision. Well, just now, everything sounded very good, down to the earth, evidence-based, enhanced efficiency, etc. But sorry, sometimes we don't just have to have efficiency. We don't just need a 3-month opinion poll. We need to have policy research that is thoroughly thought through. So sometimes projects were not handled good enough, and some projects did not meet the demand of the CPU, and we had to compress or reduce our vision and commitment. Those of us who are teaching in universities from day to day understand this. At the same time, we need to encourage collaboration. But unfortunately, competition becomes the core among institutions, you really need to be the principal investigator, PI. Senior investigator is not enough. So for the small and medium-sized institutions, their teaching staff have difficulties. They cannot take a long rest for research. They cannot take a long sabbatical. Dr. Chang Lai-wan has just returned. Your turn. After Chang Lai-wan is Helena Wong. Chairman, I'd like to understand something. Well, let me see. Sorry, I just came in. Point 18, scholarships for doctoral students. 233 students from 38 countries and jurisdictions, they're elite students, receiving scholarships from the RGC. For these 223 elite students, are Hong Kong students included? How many Hong Kong students got this scholarship for elite students? Professor Benjamin Wah. Point 18. We have 223 students, as Dr. Chong said. About 5% are Hong Kong students. Their success rate ranged from 5 to 9%. That is 223, including Hong Kong students. So the first question is answered. Then I'd like to ask, well, I believe you have to make yourself clearer. Why don't you give more scholarships to local students? Should you not give priority to local students instead of elite students from all over the world? It seems that the percentage is rather low. Well, the pool is qualitative based, not on a region based. Whether a student is from Hong Kong or other jurisdictions, we would like to have the best student to take up the research. That will help with Hong Kong's development. If we accord priority to local students, we may not get the best. So what about the other universities in the world? They also emphasize quality in terms of allocating scholarships for elite students. Yes, even in the USA, they give scholarships to local and overseas students. Singapore as well, they try to attract more students to do research there. We don't want to favor Hong Kong students. We would like to attract more scholars to Hong Kong to do research. Next, Helena Wong. Now, what about this PhD fellowship scheme? How many percentage from the mainland? Mr. Wong, last year, 58% of the students were from the mainland. So Hong Kong students, 5 to 9%. Yes, in recent years, 5 to 10%. But the success rate was 10%, over 10%. For students from other jurisdictions, the success rate was 3 to 4%. Professor, in the U.S., for state universities, for these scholarships, well, you mentioned they don't differentiate between local students and overseas students. But for research scholarships, usually they specify that only U.S. citizens or Californian citizens could apply. Here, we only have one such scheme. So if we only have 10% of Hong Kong students, that would be too few. And for the non-local students, over 90% of them, how many of them stayed on for academic or research development? Mr. Wong, Dr. Wong was correct. In overseas jurisdictions for fellowship, they have residency and citizenship requirements. But Hong Kong is too small a place. The main reason is that for Hong Kong students, after completing their undergraduate studies, they do have the wish to go overseas to conduct research. They don't want to spend all the 8 years here. Unlike in the U.S., students can switch from one university to another. But for graduates in Hong Kong, if they want to do research overseas, any resources from the government, I understand that there's one for undergrad students only. Well, we examine the issue and would like to explore a particular option for supporting our students to go overseas to do research. But the outstanding issue is whether such students need to sign an undertaking for them to come back to Hong Kong afterwards. If that is to be such an undertaking, the scheme won't be very attractive. Well, after resolving this, we hope to launch that next year. What about the $1.5 billion, 5,000 odd quotas? What criteria will be adopted in allocating what places to be allocated to which universities? Well, half is competitive based, half is to be allocated in accordance with the past formula. Still is merit based. That is, in each institution, they'll allocate the resources to different departments and disciplines. In any case, they all want to attract the best students. So much for this item. Let's proceed to the next item. Implementation of vocational education in Hong Kong. Secretary for Education, it is paper 210, bracket 03. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I should be brief because the information has already been provided to members. Perhaps I should say a few words on several aspects. Number one, we have 4 statutory organizations to provide vocational education: VTC, the CIC, the ERB, as well as the Garment Training Scheme. We have 250,000 for VTC, ERB, 84,000, 3,500 for CIC, adding up to over 30,000 students taking up vocational education or training. And under the ERB, there are also 130,000, so 460,000 altogether. One of the main foci of vocational education is, apart from knowledge and skills, practicum and internship should be provided. The VTC had placement at a pilot training and support scheme for industries that badly need manpower, such that talents and manpower can be retained. In 2014-15, the government granted the VTC 9,000 students internship opportunities. Part 3, some members of the public emphasized the traditional way of training. In 2014, there's a dedicated task force on promotion of vocational education to promote this. A report will be submitted to the Secretary for Education by mid-2015.
And fourthly, starting with the year 2015 to 16, this will be introduced to the major universities, and these will extend to stipulated degree programs in order to produce the right talents. And we see that the qualification framework is very important since it started in 2008. This has been supported by the business sector. 20 industrial ITEX training authority advisory committees have been set up, and it covers a lot of the workers in our society. Now, vocational training is being propagated in our society and taken forward and constantly being improved. And we cooperate with the industrial and commercial sectors, and there are applied learning opportunities in schools as well. So I will stop here, and I will be glad to answer questions. 4 members, Michael Tian, the Vice Chairman, Mr. Mok Nai Kwong, Albert Ho, 3 minutes each. Michael Tian. Now, basically, our young people, after receiving the basic education, now for the upward mobility, we know that for every 10 of them, at least 4 of them would not be interested in traditional cultural education. They are either not interested or they do not have the perseverance, because this is not just Chinese, English, and maths. Now, so we need to step up our vocational education. Now, previously there are factories, and now there are training opportunities in the service industries. Now, so I support pilot schemes, etc., in vocational education to attract our young people. Now, why are the people not so interested? Because, well, if they graduate, will they get jobs? Because employers want experience. Those with experience get higher pay. Those without experience do not get any employment at all. So it's very polarized right now. So you have to attract these people to join these courses if you by provide them with job opportunities. So this pilot scheme is a 3-year program. The first year is full year, and they are paid $2,800 a month, and they're exempted from other fees. And in the second and third year, they receive pay minimum $9,000 per month. The government will subsidize $2,000 or $3,000. Now, this is very popular. The employer doesn't have to pay all of the salary, and the student knows that he will have a job waiting for him after 2 or 3 years. So will the secretary tell the chief executive to include provisions in the policy address to extend the scheme to ship construction, professional driving, etc. Now, this is a very important area. We are moving in that direction, but if different industries have the different requirements, and electrical, mechanical, retail, and watches, these are the areas where we have already started. Will you propose to the CE that this will be stepped up as mentioned and to be mentioned in the policy address? The secretary has answered. No. Actually, the answer seems to be no. Now, the secretary recently went to Switzerland and Germany to learn about the vocational education there, Now, Switzerland and Germany are famous for their vocational education. A large number of students were already engaged in vocational studies in the senior secondary level. Now, this is very different from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, most students study senior secondary school in a grammar school type of environment. So the students may not be able to discover where their interests lie. So having learned from Germany and Switzerland, does the Secretary think that the model would be useful for Hong Kong to adopt? Yes, it's important. We met with many institutions, government departments. I'd like to share with you 3 phenomena. In Germany, in the past, 30% was traditional academic studies, 70% was vocational. In the past few years, they went back to 50-50. Now, so they also want to improve their vocational education in that manner. Secondly, now, how do we get the society to support and make vocational education important? We need strong support from the industrial and commercial sector. That's something we learn. Thirdly, now they need to promote to society. Now, for instance, now for many types of work, there are research reports that are published so that the parents and the students know about the picture and it's more widely accepted. Fourthly, study while you learn, while you work. Now this is a mode to be adopted in many industries. Finally, they did a very good job in mentoring. Now in Hong Kong, we have some senior secondary schools which are on the vocational side. Now, having learned from Germany, will you give special assistance to these vocational senior secondary institutions or secondary schools? Now, we have been in close contact with the schools, whether it's the vocational side or the general education side, and we try to meet the needs of the specialized industries. Mr. Dennis Mock. Now, I understand that in the VTC, some are fully subsidized, but other places are partly subsidized. So you have adopted different modes. I don't know whether this is due to the nature. Maybe some require laboratory and it's more expensive. So maybe the cost affects people's wish to study the subject. So what is your mechanism? Will you review regularly? Thank you. Now, the 4 major institutions that have been cooperating with us and in our cooperation with the schools. Now, if some student has been studying locally accredited courses, he can get funding by way of loans, etc. I'm talking about the academic institutions. How much funding do they get? Let me cite the example of the VTC. Why? Now, in 2002, the VTC followed a Sutherland report now on IT and management. now and so these have become self-financing as a result. That's what I like to ask. Now some teachers tell us they think that this has affected the level of fees and the students wish to take the courses. Now, will you review on the basis of the Sutherland report? Will you have a regular review mechanism? Now, on IT courses, since 2002, the enrollment for IT courses, half of it, or 70%, was with subsidized places. Now, in the Sutherland report, it depends on the content. Now, if there is a strong technical element, we would put that in. So, for IT, over half of the places are subsidized. Will you give us some figures for us to analyze first before we ask further questions? I would like to ask the administration to supply the data. Yes, certainly. There are 4 more. Fernando Cheung first. There will be no second round due to the time constraint. Now, on vocational training, I am more concerned about SEN, students with special education needs. Now, of course, there is a spectrum of the capabilities. Now, some are weaker in capability, and they go to the program for them, and then there is an intermediate level, but in between there is scope for vocational training, because at the elementary workshops for the more heavily handicapped, the level of skill is rather simple, whereas at the culinary institutes, the level is higher. For instance, at certain institutions, the graduates are capable of taking these courses, but your thresholds are a bit high. You require interviews in English, for example, so they face a lot of difficulty. Now, will you consider plugging the hole and provide vocational training for these students? Thank you, Chairman. It's correct. Now, for our graduates from the institutions for the more handicapped, they may not be equipped to enter the institutions. Now, that program is under the Labor and Welfare Bureau, so it's been said that it's been proposed that if they are not qualified to go to the youth institutions, maybe there can be courses for them at their original institutions of the lower level. Now, it's the Labor Welfare Bureau, and then so both institutions will shove the responsibility to the other. Now, I believe the program for the more handicapped is under Labor and Welfare Bureau. Now, so there is a spectrum of students in the middle who are left without places to go to or for proper training.
其實佢一個政府嘅資助23億裏邊。
Of the $2.3 billion, $300 million from the Labor and Welfare Bureau, and $29 billion have been reserved for this aspect for special launching. And together with the VTC, we hold regular discussions. So on members' views just now, we'll take them up in future. Mr. Albert Ho, I've looked at the situation of Germany. One successful element of Germany is that in terms of vocational training, they adopt a dual approach. That is to find training opportunities in employment opportunities. That is, the enterprises do provide training opportunities. That is, they gain experience by implementation, and after gaining experience, they can receive further training. I heard that the very successful grammar schools may not suit these students, but they may be able to do things very quickly. So once they are inspired, they can turn back to theories which they can absorb much quicker. So can you have a more comprehensive apprenticeship system such that vocational training students can receive apprenticeship? You should provide more places. Secretary, yes, that's important. Together with 20-odd industries, we've set up ITACs. We keep in close exchanges with them. Given these relationships and setups, we'll be able to implement the apprenticeship scheme that will be more pragmatic. And $140 million have been committed to assist the VTC to right from the start of the school year to provide 2,000 places for E&M, clock and watches, and other retail industries. So Mr. Ho is correct. We go to each and every industry and practice opportunities are available to the students. In the long run, what incentives will you provide to enterprises such that they will collaborate with the government? For the enterprises, we have training institutions to plan the curricula with them, with the enterprises. So there are career prospect planning and training planning. And then for the enterprises, they can retain manpower as a result. That happened in Germany as well. So that's the main support they received. That is, manpower can be provided to enterprises under such an arrangement. Is it possible that you can identify practicum opportunities in the enterprises? Well, I understand that most students were able to find jobs, and the enterprises would like these students, these trainees, to stay. That's very clear. Mr. Leong Kok Hong, well, I think Mr. Eddie Ng was wasting our time. Germany has a totally different system. The apprenticeship system of Germany allows the trainees to go back to universities. After completing the 9th year, they can have a choice. And if they can't continue in a university, they can switch back. And then the industry structure is different. Every day, the CE is saying that this young person had gone back to the mainland to sell red wine when he discussed the policy address with members. E&M, printing, clock and watch, and construction. Well, mainland enterprises have been coming to Hong Kong to gain contracts. So apart from the MTR, what genuine construction industry do we have? And then, do we really have a genuine apprenticeship scheme for the cafe restaurants? They need manpower. But because of our rental policy, these enterprises have no way out. What about the printing industry? How many people can it accommodate? Is this your question? Secretary, printing industry, how many people can it absorb? And then, Secretary, what sort of reform would you suggest to the CE in his policy address? For the construction industry, for the CIC, we got 84,300 places. That's in the paper. Number 2, different industries have different hierarchies, even for the catering industry. So we adopted a step-by-step approach for the catering industry. We have to do it slowly. We have to wait for conditions to ripen. So we go from industry to industry. Now, what about the service industry? How are you going to upgrade it? Well, recently we got this new industry, that is the retail industry, which can be subdivided into different categories. In Switzerland, the most popular program is that for salesmen of dedicated products. Well, all along we've got this post of sales manager. You just give it a new name. It's equivalent to salesman. Well, even for university graduates, they may not stick to their original discipline. Chang Lai-wan, Mr. Chairman, recently I had this colleague with 3 sons. The eldest son was an associate degree student who then went on to university. And now he had been working for 5 to 6 years, earning around $18,000. But then he owes the bank and the grant and loan system several $100,000. He may be a middle-aged man when he pay off his debts. For the second son, he received vocational training, immediately joining the workforce upon graduation and received a salary. He worked for around 5 years already, also now earning around $18,000. But his elder brother has to pay off debts, but he doesn't have to. He's now saving money. He considers that in 10 years' time, he should have saved up sufficient money for owning a home with his spouse. So my friend told me that he would definitely not put his third son in university, but would urge him to receive vocational training. So, Secretary, would you please do more publicity to tell our young people the prospect of vocational training and what subjects they should choose? Maybe if they graduate in 2 years' time, what jobs they can find in the market, and what about their promotion prospect? Can you do more to tell our young people, such that our young people don't need to be in the case of this third son who is saying that his mother prevents him from taking up his preferred subject? Secretary, this is a very important aspect. In August, we have 3 meetings for this dedicated task force on vocational training. That is how to enhance social awareness on vocational training. Number 2, we shouldn't wait. We should have this lifelong planning during the secondary stage. And our students should adopt a multi-pronged approach in their consideration. Secretary, in that case, I hope that before each student chooses his subjects and disciplines, he should be clear about what he is going to do in future. Then it is successful. Secretary, can you do that? We hope that each student knows his strengths and weaknesses and will be able to make improvement and understand the opportunities in front of them such that he can make a choice. So much for this item. Next item, registration for the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination of various subjects. It's paper 2110 bracket 04 and 05. The Secretariat has put down your name already? Yes, the clerk saw you. Because I had to read out the agenda. Perhaps I should invite the Undersecretary for Education, Mr. Kevin Young, to introduce the paper to us. Yes, under the new system, the new senior secondary education and the academic structure was introduced in 2009, and 2 to 3 subjects could be chosen by the students. And 2 public examinations had been replaced by this HKDSE. That is, the Hong Kong School Certificate of Education examination and the Hong Kong A-level examination. Statistics and analyses are already set out in the paper. For the DSE, the HKC, and the HKALE, the participation rates had been different, which had been declining in the past few years. So we shouldn't just compare the actual number of students and carry out analysis. The percentage of the various subjects chosen had been offered to members. We gave you the number of students choosing the subjects and compared them with the total number of students. This indicates the overall distribution of students among the various subjects, and that indicates their interest. These figures have remained stable, and the authorities would enhance the design of examinations such that students can choose their disciplines and subjects in accordance with their interests and strengths. For the 20 optional subjects, Chinese history ranks 8th in terms of popularity. For the review of the new curriculum, 2 electives became 1 to ease the pressure on students and teachers, and the participation enrollment rate had enhanced slightly, rising to 2.06%, rising to the rank of the 7th most popular subject with ICT. There won't be any more school-based assessment for Chinese history so as to further ease the pressure on students and teachers. This will facilitate the choosing of Chinese history, and to encourage more students to choose Chinese history in senior secondary school and to enhance their interest, a dedicated task force has been set up to review the Chinese history curriculum in the junior secondary stage. That's under the CDC. We hope to come out with some proposals in the middle of next year for public consultation. Well, for the first round, I saw 4 hands: Regina Ip, Helena Wong, Ip Kien Yuen, Leung Kwok Hong. Some members might have been going in and out of the room. I suggest 3 minutes for each member for the first round. Regina Ip.
There is a lot of number games in the document. Now, there's a wrong comparison. Now, it seems that for the for the ALE, there are only 30 to 40,000, and then the DSE 75,000. So the figures are different. It's difficult to compare. Now, since you have had the new senior curriculum, there are 4 electives. There are 4 basic subjects and 2 electives. The humanities suffer. There is much less enrollment for the humanities, whether it's Chinese history or Western history, Chinese literature, English literature. There have been drops in those, and there have been chain effects. So there have been less enrollment in these subjects, so there are less enrollment at university level as well. For instance, at my alma mater, Hong Kong U, the subjects are getting more rudimentary, and there are less courses. The professors tell us there are less students enrolled, so our population is less well versed in the humanities. For instance, para 10. Now, in the first 4 years of the DSE, now has been finally a rise to 1.06%, less than 1% compared with the first 4 years. So this is really a numbers game. And you say that students in Chinese history at the junior secondary level now some 80% have Chinese history at the independent Chinese secondary subject. I seem to remember that the number used to be 70%. Now, this is you have to take into account also the curriculum time spent. As I said earlier, the 3 exams are different, so it's difficult to compare the numbers. So we compared by the number of people who set the exams. So on the 2 questions by Mrs. Yip, now for those schools with independent Chinese history subjects, the figure that we cited before was 85% approximately. All junior secondary school students have to study Chinese history. So the contents of Chinese history are mandatory. Previously it was not 75%, it was about 85%, now it's 88%. As an independent subject, yes. Now the second question was now the ratio. Now here we only say that in the past few years it dropped from 5.34 to 4.94, and this year, because we made some adjustment, there has been a little increase. It's not a major increase because it takes a few more years to see the trend, but at least it has been a slight increase. Next, Helena Wong. Now for some subjects you see a drop in enrollment. For instance, the one on religion and so on, and also some science and life, 0.26%. Now, maybe because of curriculum development, students don't choose these subjects as much. Now, so the government will merely let these subjects die off. There won't be such majors, such disciplines at university. Do you have any parameter? Now, if the rate falls to a certain level, then you will not have the subject anymore? Or will you have the exam no matter how low the rate? In principle, we will try to keep the subject open, because for the new senior secondary curriculum, we hope to offer greater choice. For instance, within science, we have biological science, and there's the combined science, and there might be now on religion, now that that is a subject by itself. We will try to keep that open. It's in the subject by itself. Now, usually we will look into what's the problem with the subject. We will talk to the HKEA why students don't take the course, and ultimately we will leave it to student. Now, well, will you stop having the subject if the enrollment drops too low? Because it will be very uneconomic if there are too few students. What's the practical approach at the school level? Now, of course, this will constitute pressure to the school. So very often we suggest that they form a network among neighboring schools. So if one school offers that subject, the other schools can send their students there. So we go to the schools and talk to them. Now on world history, now I said that at junior secondary school level and senior secondary school level, you may not offer world history. 88% is that's for Chinese history now. So only about 10% of students take the Western history. At the junior secondary level, there are both Chinese history and world history. That's for certain. Now compared to 2010 HKCE and HKDSE, now the number of students dropped by 21%. There are 9 subjects where the decline has been as much as 50%. For Chinese history, 75%. So overall, it's a drop of 20%, but there are 9 subjects where the decline is 50%, and these are major subjects. So the key factor seems to be that when you switch to DSE, the number of electives is less than under HKCE. In HKCE, there are 4 electives, now only 2. That's the reason. So if that's the principal factor, is that something good or bad? Now, for after the NSS, new secondary school curriculum comes into place, the students they study only 4 plus 2, only 6 subjects. Is that the goal initially for the new secondary curriculum? The Vice Chairman is correct. One reason for the reduction in enrollment is that being that subject because there are now less elective subjects that students have to take. Now, actually, the 2 exams are different concepts. Now, the major difference is that for the core requirements in DSE, there are liberal studies. So there's liberal studies, so it covers a wide range of matters, so the scope of education is not narrowed. Now, at the new secondary school program, we want students to expand their knowledge. Now, so it doesn't just depend on the number of subjects, because there is a mandatory subject. The liberal studies is very wide. It covers Hong Kong, the country, and the world. So this is not just dependent on the number of subjects. Next, Leung Kwok Hong. Chairman, I don't have much to say. I think the reason the Hong Kong education system failed is that our exams have been replaced by exams abroad, like the IB. Now, you don't let the schools offer IB. You don't let more than half the students take the IB. Now, you schools have to get the subsidy from you, and you force the students there to take certain subjects. Now, this is where you lose. You should sort out the problem with the CE. Now, people want to take somebody else's exams, so maybe you should upgrade your own exams so that people want to take your exams. And this is an unfair starting point. The rich people, they go to take the IB. The people without money, they suffer. Now, even though it might be originated from the Donald Tsang era, you will still have to make the change. Now, the government's own exams, people don't want to take it. The people want to take the other exam offered somewhere else. Now, I'm telling Mr. C.Y. Leung, you should make the change, even though it might have been created by Donald Tsang. I'd like to ask Mr. Yeung, Mr. Undersecretary, now, in which other country was is the exam of that country, the exam created by that government is slighted by the parents. People don't want to take that exam. Now, in every place, for every government, they all try to design a curriculum and education system for their own students, and they have an assessment system. Let the Undersecretary answer first. Please do not interrupt. So for the NSS curriculum, we designed the HKDSE, and we are regularly reviewing it. Now, in the past, the GCE is level with our HKCEE. Now only the poor people are forced to take the HKDSE. Chairman, that HKDSE has a lot of recognition internationally. But the problem is that a lot of people prefer to take the IB. Ms. Cheng Lai-wan, now I understand that the Education Bureau, starting this term, for every school, you give them $500,000 to subsidize the students to train the Form 6 students, offering them life planning. Now, will you offer among the electives subjects that have to do with their vocation? This is very important, because when there's an exam, the student will be forced to think what subject he wishes to take, what vocation will he choose, because this has to do with exams, so he will pay attention. We will certainly consider that. When we introduce life planning, we also consider how other subjects can tie in.
In fact, we don't start from S5 and S6. We need to do planning right from S1. And then by S3, when they choose subjects, that's the most important time. The students must know what's in front of them for their future. So for curriculum development, in all our documents, we emphasize this issue. That is, how to assess students in choosing their subjects so as to facilitate life planning. Chang Lai-wan, when we launch subjects and disciplines or whatever, we may have very good intentions. But the most important point is that we'll be able to attain our goal. We have to see results. I hope that, say, by next year, I can interview schools and talk to students to see what their interests are. And then if they enter university after 4 years, what professional training will be offered to them and what career prospect they have. So we have to have value for money for this life planning. So I would like to see results soon. Yes, we're heading towards that direction. Next, Mr. Albert Ho, I have a few small questions. First of all, I'm quite surprised that Chinese literature had declined so much. When I was small, we loved Chinese literature, and the teachers were very much interested in teaching us the subject. Now, Chinese literature is a very interesting subject. It's for you to understand the culture of the whole country. China has culture, history, and literature combined together. Literature is very much related to history. 5.34 for history, but literature 2% only. You also have a Chinese language subject, right? Is it that after a student has chosen Chinese language, he doesn't feel necessary to take history, Chinese history as well? Otherwise, there would be duplication. If that's the case, you should combine Chinese literature with Chinese history. This is a huge decline. If you don't study literature, you don't understand Chinese history. That's my belief. And Chinese philosophy is actually mixed with Chinese history. And physical education, is appalling. Maybe it's not related to university entrance. But physical education, music, visual art, and so forth are very important. Many overseas universities emphasize holistic development for students. They look at the students' achievements in physical education, sports, music, and art. Well, Hong Kong is not too poor in terms of sports. We've turned out a very good sportsmen. So why can't we have more emphasis for physical education? Undersecretary, for physical education, if I may refer you to the appendix, the figures are more or less the same. In the past, we didn't have physical education for HKALE, but if we want to compare the figure with HKCEE, you see the percentage is actually higher. You should refer to the appendix. I'm talking about the general figures. For literature, yes, the number of students has been dropping. We conducted some review. May I defer to Mr. Yip? For Chinese language, we've added famous quotations and classical Chinese so as to nurture the quality of students in understanding Chinese literature and culture. Well, if you do it that way, less students will be choosing Chinese literature. So you really have to look at this. Mr. Kenneth Chan, Chairman, I think we're concerned about the decline in student number for certain subjects. For subjects of our concern, we would like to have more information from the administration. I believe you have conducted some research on this trend. That is, why is there such a decline in the number of students? I won't hastily jump to the conclusion that we should drop the DSE and move for IB. For IB, the Chinese subject has a lower level than the DSE. Now, these examinations are essential to our students. I hope that the government should be more generous by offering these examinations free of charge. So to be fair, you should offer free examinations for both rich and poor students. And then for schools and the authority and the students, they should emphasize free examinations. I think the HKEA has to study the unit cost of these examinations. I think the government has to consider this. Otherwise, you'll be exerting unnecessary pressure on the authority. And then the EAA has to find people to assess the scripts. And all these stages have to be finished within a time frame. And maybe the number of students sitting for the examinations will drop. Then the authority won't be able to even recover cost. So these figures are not enough. So you should consider free examinations. That is, no fees and charges. And then, given these differences among the various subjects, what solutions will you offer? Or you would like these subjects to die, so to speak, naturally? Well, we'll try to find solutions. As for examination fees, all along our principle is that the DSE should be self-financing. That is, examination fees collected should be able to support the costs. In the past 2 years, we've not been increasing examination fees for the subjects. No more time. First round, I'll be the final speaker. I agree with Mrs. Ip that your paper is playing with figures. From the figures, it is a fact that the number of students choosing Chinese history is dropping. 2014, DSE participation rate, 1/10. 6,464 students, but in 2010, when you got the CEE, a third of the students chose Chinese history, with a total number of 26,186 students that year. Mr. Ip Kin Yuen, the deputy chairman, said the students were choosing 4 subjects in the old system and 2 in the new system. For Chinese history, is it that the social environment has changed, or the students have lost their interest? But the fact is that less students have been choosing Chinese history. After the handover, we're a part of China, so we must understand Chinese history. That's an obligation. So what measures and plans do you have to enhance the number of students taking up Chinese history? You must not allow the figure to drop continuously. Otherwise, as Dr. Eleanor Wong said, one day the number may drop to just a few, so no school will offer the subject. Chairman, it's difficult to compare the 3 examinations. Maybe the HKEA will elaborate. Yes, we have few students for Chinese history, but for biology, chemistry, and physics, the number of students has also dropped by more than half. I won't argue with you about the figures. How are you going to enhance students' interest in Chinese history such that they'll choose it for public examinations? I won't argue with you on the figures due to time constraint. How would you enhance students' interest in Chinese history? As I said, in the midway review, we'll look at the problem. Maybe we can give them options to choose one from two, and then we'll try to enhance students' interest in Chinese history in junior secondary stage. Well, 260 students were led to visit Nanjing by the Secretary for Education. Can you expand that to all students? Well, that's not really a useful method to resolve this issue of a decline in the number of students taking up Chinese history. But that's one of the methods where I respect your view. Mrs. Regina Ip, 3 minutes, questions and answers. Good. I have a lot to ask. But as Dr. Tong is here, Mr. Tong Chong-si is here, I'd like to ask about examinations. I did ask how the scripts for liberal studies were assessed. I was told that there could be as high as 16 assessments. 16 at most for one script. In 2012, 2013, 2014 for the DSE, how many scripts had been assessed? 16 times each year. You can give me the answer later. And then for the liberal studies, for assessment, some teachers told me that according to the assessment reference for 2013, there's a question about enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of motor engines. And in the assessment guidelines, you say that when a student provides 3 answers out of the total number, you will allow a pass. Well, one of the teachers did not buy this. So you're actually assessing skills and way of expression. It's not actually an examination of liberal knowledge. We provided practice papers to teachers for trial. For the assessment criteria, all along we've been saying that for liberal studies, there are no standard answers, no model answers. So the points we put forth were only for reference. Usually, the assessors will convene a meeting before assessment. They'll first assess certain answers from certain students to see whether or not the assessment guide is applicable, because some students might have offered different answers, but still they're very good answers. So the overall assessment exercise has been very interactive. Reference materials provided by us may not be comprehensive enough, and not every scenario was covered. Now, we adopt this evidence-based approach. So whatever viewpoint put forth by a student must be information and material-based and not empty talk.
How about in 2013? How many papers have been assessed 16 times? I will provide the information afterwards. Next, Yip Kin Yun. Just now, Mr. Yip said that he wished there to be more electives for senior secondary students, but the result is that the current number of electives is small in number. It's only 2. Now, the reason given is that you say we have a new core subject, liberal studies, but you now have 2 less electives. So that is not equal. There's no compensation, adequate compensation. Now, in the days under HKCE, the students take 7 or 8 subjects or even 10 subjects. Now, is it that you have more contents, more workload per subject so that the students cannot take on more subjects? Or is it that the curriculum time is less? Now, why is it that the scope of electives has narrowed? Now, according to Mr. Yip, now this is a situation may not be very desirable. Now, in the NSS New Secondary School curriculum, we try to broaden the knowledge of students, broaden the scope of the knowledge, and we don't just try to increase the number of subjects. So we want some capable students to be able to take more subjects as a So you have a core subject, liberal studies. Will that be worth 2 electives? That seems to be your question. Now, I don't think you can talk about such equality. Now, in HKCE, the quantity and the depth are different. Now, here we link up to post-secondary education. There's a direct link, so the level is different. So the level of knowledge isn't just about quantity. The purpose is that the student should graduate and have the knowledge to make him a good citizen. Well, wouldn't you want the scope of the knowledge to be broader? Well, if the person can take more subjects, of course, that's fine. But there are many factors like the enrollment by universities and so on. Helena Wong, I didn't quite hear the answer. Now, in secondary schools, for world history, do the students get to take that course in the secondary school? Now, so is it that 88% of the junior secondary schools do not study world history? Now, we were talking about Chinese history. So 88% have Chinese history, but these secondary schools that have Chinese history also have world history at the junior secondary level. This is a core element. So there is both world history element and Chinese history element. These are core elements, not core subjects. So where do these core elements occur? In this case, it's in the Chinese history and world history at junior secondary level. So in one subject, there's both Chinese history and world history, yes. So I can only take on one question at the third round. Mrs. Regina Yip, 2 minutes. Now, just now, Albert Ho said it. Now, there's been a sharp drop for Chinese history. I'd like the government to reflect. Now, you change the way you teach Chinese history. In our days, we study the Chinese classics, the famous authors, and then some of your experts say that you don't need to pay attention to the content. You only need to able to speak and comprehend. And so students are now are less knowledgeable. There have been sharp drops in M1 and M2 as well. And many engineering professors tell me that if the two students don't take calculus at secondary level, they cannot catch up at university. If you don't have students taking calculus, how can Hong Kong try to promote technology? Now on maths, on M1 and M2, extended maths, we can see that in the coming year, if we compare to the old system, say the HKCE, 5.99% of the students took extended maths. In ALE, is 16% who take additional maths or further maths. But for DSE, the figure is 9.69%, so it's in between the two. So we are not being complacent with the current figure, but this is a subject of concern to us. So there needs to be more planning on the choice of subjects. So if the students want to study technology, they should choose the relevant subjects. So we come to the end for this item. Next item, parent education. The document is CB 4 2014 to 15 bracket 06. Mr. Young, due to the time constraint, I just will briefly touch upon a few points. Now different departments promote parent education. Now for education, the parents are major stakeholders at schools, so we think that their participation should play a major role to turn our young people into responsible citizens. So we start with kindergarten. We try to promote whole person development with the cooperation of parents. Now the committee of on homeschool cooperation has been established since 1993. Now the CHSC has conducted many seminars, websites to promote information on parent education so that the parents can learn about how to bring up the children and understand about the directions of the children's education. So I'd like to leave more time for the questions. Only 2 or 3 members have raised their hands. Now this meeting is to end at 6:30. There are 4 members, so we can extend the meeting. If there is no second round, then 10 minutes each. Then Michael Chen, Yip Kin Yuen, Kenneth Chen, Helena Wong. 3 minutes each. Michael Chen, please. Now, parent education, for 20 years, it has relied on Parent-Teacher Association to try to offer a happy childhood. I think that's out of tune with society. Now, if the people depend on the PTA, how can parents learn how to teach the children? How can children have a happy childhood? We don't need parent education. We need to educate the parents. I think there's a difference that the secretary need to understand. Now there are these helicopter parents and all kinds of deviant or parents or who are not doing right. So what can we do to make them pay attention to balance the education? Now, there should be a comprehensive the parent education course, say a 10-hour course of basic knowledge on how to educate students, not Chinese, maths, and English, not the number of words, vocabulary, but to make them understand the need for balanced development and how to uncover the areas of interest. Now, traditionally, the education sector doesn't study that. Now, at the primary one entrance exam, the applicant's parents should go sit through this course of not more than 10 hours so that the parents understand how to help their children when they enter primary school, what level of pressure the student can come under. So I suggest that when you enroll the students, you give a score. Now, when you whether the places are assigned overall or by individual schools, you can give them a score. Now, so on parent education or educating parents, now the scope is very wide. Every child might be different due to age or background. I'm talking about primary one. Now, if, say, we have a structured course at the primary one level, we can go back and think about it. Now, very often we explore such issues at the parent-teacher association level. Now, should students, parents be given a score? I think we will study the idea with the committee members. Your time is up. I hope you offer more incentives. Next is me. Now, we are facing several types of parents. Some are concerned about the students but do not have the knowledge. So when they come and receive parent education, that would be most effective. But there are several kinds of parents that we face. First type, Mr. Michael Tan mentioned that. For instance, some oddball parents, they have their own ways of thinking about how to educate their children. They don't accept people's ideas. Their attitude seems problematic to us from looking at it from a professional point of view. So how do we make them reflect and make adjustment? That might be a major adjustment. The second type of parents who are difficult is that they do not know what to do and they do not have the resources, especially time, to take on studies. If they have the opportunity, of course they would be happy, but say cases where both parents work till late in the day, they do not have the time to receive parent education.
困難嘅呢
The third type of parents that have difficulties involve those parents who are not that concerned about their students. In that case, the intervention of social workers is necessary, and active intervention as well. PTAs cannot resolve such parents. Now, facing these difficult types of parents, has the Education Bureau considered how to jump out of the box and have some new ideas? Are there any new methods to assist these parents so as to teach them or educate them? Mr. Ye, I think for the first two types, at least they're concerned about their children, so they're easier. Take, for example, the first type of parents covers the rich fathers and rich mothers. It's not that they don't heed other people's advice. It's just that after listening to certain advice, they resort to a certain path. If we give them more opportunities to let them understand the actual situation, it may be helpful. Number two, if time is a difficult factor, we can make use of the internet, booklets, manuals, etc., such that parents can use their own time to go through those. And we can even organize seminars and talks for these parents. I hope that only very few parents belong to the third type. In fact, these parents themselves have problems. They're difficult to handle. As the Deputy Chairman said, if these parents are not concerned about their children, such that their children have learning and emotional problems, then we'll have to rely on school social workers to hold discussions with the parents and work out solutions. If you ask me whether there's just one formula to resolve these parents, my answer is no. Well, the chairman, are you interested in chairing this meeting? While he's coming up here, Mr. Kenneth Chan, it seems that the government has been working hard to provide parent education to meet social demands. But nothing is mentioned in the paper as to the percentage of parents participating in this kind of parent education. Many of us here are also parents. Are such counseling services really helpful in the contact between parents and schools and in helping the children? Well, honestly speaking, parents usually look at what the neighbors are doing. Oh, if the neighbor is going to that school, if that parent is choosing such tuition groups, I will do the same. But of course, we'll tell the parents to look at the character and nature of their own child. But we may be detached from society. Society is actually another reality. So, Secretary, when are you going to accept the reality? And just now, Mr. Michael Ten even said that we should force parents to study. That's actually useless. Such acts may even become a nuisance to members of the public. So on top of this basic parent education, can we have more resources to assist teachers to help and support families? If you talk about parent education in very generic terms, I'm afraid that you may just be daydreaming. Maybe only tea gatherings can be organized, small booklets being published, etc., etc. So can you provide more resources to assist more parents and their students to face the pressure? So more resources? Well, we mention in paragraph 8 that in 2013-14, around $23 million were provided to schools' PTAs and FPTAs. Not just tea gatherings or parenting activities were organized. We had a wide range of topics. But of course, if you ask me how much the parents were able to absorb, I can only say that we'll try to do more. Well, that's better than nothing, but $23 million, honestly speaking, is not a huge sum. Helena Wong? Chairman, I also feel that those of us who have been teaching know that when you try to help a student, you very often have to help his parents as well. So parent education is very important. From the viewpoint of teachers, teachers are already overloaded with work. If you ask parents to take care of students' families and parents as well, it's impossible. So you must have resources. The resources must reach school social workers. That is, you should increase the number of school social workers. When a teacher discovers that a student has family problems, the school social worker can intervene to assist parents with problems. But PTAs and FPTAs are only using around $5,000 per school for such activities. So you can only organize a few barbecue or Christmas parties. You have to help teachers in family visits. So you must have case interference. Otherwise, PTAs and FPTAs are more or less useless. Well, I have to go into the detail. The parent education that we discuss here aims at assisting students in their learning life and personal growth. In general, we would like to help parents understand how to take care of their children and how to take care of their children's development. As for problematic parents, so to speak, who have led to learning difficulties on their children's part, then we need the help of school social workers. We have to go beyond parent education, so the two are actually different. For activities organized by PTAs, they're offering more opportunities for parents to get together to exchange experience and views on parenting. Teachers may interfere to help, and we touch more on the emotional side of the students. Only one for second round. Mr. Ip Kin Yun. Questions and answers should not go beyond 6:45. The last remark of the Undersecretary, Mr. Yeung, is very important. That is, we shouldn't adopt a broad brush approach. We have to take care of different types of parents. I mentioned them already. If you're interested, you can subdivide those types into subtypes. I think the parents of children with special needs need our attention most. Every now and then they get together to share their needs because they have a strong feeling that they should get together to have mutual support and mutual learning so that they get new knowledge. As for the other groups of parents, I believe the government can do more for the disadvantaged parents. Mr. Young, the Undersecretary, said that for those parents who lack time, we can provide internet resources and booklets. But those two also require resources. But most parents who don't have time are from the grassroots. They're the disadvantaged parents, so to speak. Do they really have time and resources to surf the internet to obtain information? So the question should rather be, can we take one step forward to help them? Now, one type of parents who don't have time are those who are too busy with their work. Another type involves those parents who have to work non-stop for a livelihood. So how can we assist them? At the moment, do we have advisory committees or other platforms to collect wisdom and knowledge to help you develop a strategy to take care of parents with different needs and to provide suitable education to them? The collection of experience and wisdom is very important for our success, so a platform for that is important. Chairman, we have to look at the background of parents, which differs a great deal from parent to parent. As for this establishment of parent education, we do emphasize the school-based approach. That is, we work within the school. We have to look at the characteristics of the school, whether or not that school has more parents of a particular type, where they may have learning difficulties. So for a school, very often we can see that we have more parents of a particular type than others. Anyway, we would like to take care of different groups of parents. As for platform, we have a very important platform. That is the Committee on Home School Cooperation, CHSC, and we have a federation of PTAs in all 18 districts. There's liaison between the two. In the CHSC, all these issues can be discussed amply. We'll also make use of this platform to take on board members' views today, for example, on how parent-teacher relationship can be handled. So we'll try to go back to the CHSC to see how we can help parents. As for parents with children with special learning needs, they need special attention. Don't forget that they have all undergone a confusing and perplexing state. After they have identified that their children have special needs, they always go through a confusing and perplexing period. So we should try to help these parents and assist them to get connected with mutual help organizations as soon as possible. So much for this item. If there's no other business, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.